Nintendo was in a bind of mammoth proportions. The failure of the Wii U and the rise of smartphones had them hemorrhaging money and very much on track for exiting the console market. The Switch was not without its problems. It came with uncharacteristic hardware issues and a very characteristically spotty online service, but it created a market for a brand new type of gaming hardware and rescued Nintendo from the brink of defeat in what might possibly be the greatest reversal of fortunes in gaming history. The Switch took less than a year to outsell the Wii U. Nintendo brought many of its bread and butter series to new heights, quality and sales-wise, and even set themselves up to diversity outside of gaming for a long time to come. There's no telling what the future has in store. All the success in the world doesn't guarantee smooth sailing ahead, but whatever happens next, Nintendo reached new plateaus during the Switch era, and it was a wild ride. This is the story of how Nintendo blew their lead, lost their way, found their footing, and gained it all back. It begins all the way back in 2006, when Nintendo took the gaming world by storm with a little console known as the Wii. Though Nintendo avoided a Sega-level catastrophe, they finished the 6th generation of consoles solidly in 3rd place behind the Sony PlayStation 2 and Microsoft's Xbox. The GameCube was not an out-and-out financial failure, but it sold 21 million units worldwide, compared to almost 33 million for the N64. After losing back-to-back console generations to Sony, Nintendo really needed a hit, and they got it with the Wii. The Wii shipped over 100 million units and outsold the PS3 and Xbox 360 when all was said and done. After the triumph of the Nintendo Wii, which saw Nintendo's original break from competing in the graphical power arms race with Sony and Microsoft, in favor of their so-called Blue Ocean strategy, the Wii U was an unmitigated disaster. Number one, the name was confusing. Was this supposed to be a new console, or was the tablet an accessory for the original Switch? People who spend time reading gaming websites would certainly know, but would a parent buying games for their kids get it? Hard to say. Number two, Nintendo had trouble attracting third-party dev support because the system was somewhat difficult to develop for, and these problems were compounded by what turned out to be a low install base, which created something of a vicious cycle. The conundrum is summed up well by a quote from this unnamed dev. So these larger studios had a choice. Would they develop a port of an existing game to a console with limited capabilities and limited market penetration? Or put their teams to work on developing new features and concepts for the real next generation consoles that were going to be launched that year? When you look at it this way, the choice isn't that hard. These were real problems, but if you ask me, the root of the Wii U's downfall was that Nintendo built around a tablet that just wasn't compelling hardware. I liked the tablet concept when it was first announced. It seemed like Nintendo was taking a DS and splitting it so the top screen was your TV and the bottom screen would be the tablet in your hand. But when I got access to the finished product, it just wasn't something I wanted to play games on. As much as I personally was very on board with the new direction of the Wii Remote and was glad to see Nintendo was trying something different from the rest of the industry, I just couldn't see myself sitting there for extended sessions using that tablet. Sure, the Wii U Pro Controller existed if you wanted a more traditional experience, but my concern was it might be tough to use for many games that are built around the tablet's functionality. It's not like the Wii U Pro Controller had a screen on it. My theory is that if the Wii U tablet had been fun to play on, Nintendo would have sold more Wii U's, which would have incentivized third-party devs to devote build time to the system, which would have led to further sales. Whatever the reason, hardware, software, marketing, the public passed on it. There was a lot riding on the Wii U. Nintendo had quickly gone from printing money during the Wii and DS era to posting its first loss as a video game company in 2012, and the losses continued to mount in 2013 and 2014. To make matters worse, Nintendo's CEO Satoru Iwata, who helped develop Kirby, Pokemon, and Super Smash Bros. In the 90s, before taking over as Nintendo's CEO and pioneering the Wii's Blue Ocean approach, lost his battle with cancer and passed away in 2015. Nintendo, of course, is an over 100-year-old company with thousands of employees spread across the world, but losing possibly its most senior leader and respected creative force made many wonder if Nintendo would forever lose its spark in the time that they needed it most. In Ask Iwata, a book of Iwata's wisdom put together after his passing, Mario, Zelda, and Donkey Kong creator Shigeru Miyamoto recalled coming up with the idea for the Nintendo DS in the parking lot of an Italian restaurant and missing the ability to collaborate with Iwata. His words are, "Iwata left many words and structures that live on in the work of our younger employees today. The only problem is that if there is some good-for-nothing idea I come up with over the weekend, I have no one to share it with the next Monday. That I can no longer hear him say, "Oh, about that thing," is a bit of a problem for me. It makes me sad. Without Iwata, it seemed like Nintendo's extremely uphill battle could well be insurmountable.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. Let's make a good launch for Wii U.
Okay.
And I love Wii U.
Thank you very much.
The Wii U was supposed to reverse Nintendo's fortunes on the console hardware side and help it take on the growing and encroaching mobile games market on the handheld side. But it couldn't stop the bleeding and dug Nintendo into a very deep hole. The Wii sold over 100 million units by the end of its run, and people inside Nintendo reportedly thought the Wii U would break 100 million in sales as well. During a shareholder meeting, Nintendo president Tatsumi Kimishima put it this way. In an internal sales representative meeting, someone projected we could sell close to 100 million Wii U systems worldwide. The thinking was that because the Wii sold well, the Wii U would follow suit. Not only did it not move those numbers, it wasn't even close. All told, the Wii U sold about 13.5 million units across its 4 years on the market, massively underselling the GameCube. Compare that to its contemporaries, the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, which each sold over 10 million units in their first year on the market. Compare that to the Dreamcast, a historic failure, which sold just over 9 million units in a little over 2 years on the market, which was weak enough to send Sega out of the console hardware business for good. The Wii U also sold a little over 9 million units in its first 2 years on the market, a very eerily similar track record. Though the Wii U had some solid first-party titles, its system sales were a disaster by any conceivable metric. All of a sudden, Nintendo was taking heat from investors, and it started looking more and more like they'd have to give in and put their properties on mobile devices. One of Iwata's last announcements before his passing was a partnership with mobile provider DeNA. In his announcement remarks, Iwata said, "In recent years, with the spread of smart devices, we have increasingly heard a variety of opinions on the future of the dedicated video game system business, and in particular relatively pessimistic ones. We lost the balance of revenue and expenses as the era of the super strong yen occurred during the transition periods for Nintendo DS to Nintendo 3DS, and from Wii to Wii U, and we were not able to make those platform transitions as smoothly as we had expected. In order to flexibly deal with the developments of the internet and social media, as well as the changes in the people's lifestyles, we will start strategic endeavors so that Nintendo can maximize the value of our IP that we have used primarily for our own dedicated gaming platforms. This is why Nintendo has decided to utilize smart devices aggressively. Very simply put, it is structurally the same as when Nintendo, which was founded 125 years ago when there were no TVs, started to aggressively take advantage of the TV as a communication channel. Now that smart devices have grown to become the window for so many people to personally connect with society, it would be a waste not to use these devices. After several years of refusing to entertain the idea of putting Nintendo's properties on mobile devices, it was looking like they didn't have much of a choice. The walls were closing in, and news of a new console, codenamed the NX, started surfacing seemingly a year or two earlier than they otherwise might have if the Wii U had sold to expectations. Nintendo wanted people to know that they had something new in the works, but being Nintendo, they were very cagey over just what it is they were working on. Rumors flew wild. Some thought it would be a break from the Wii, Wii U, 3DS line. Others said Nintendo might try to compete with Sony and Microsoft again. Others theorized about a possible home console portable hybrid. And what would the controller be? Would Nintendo go back to normal control scheme-wise? Or would they try to pull another experimental stunt? Folks dug up a patent filing for a controller made almost entirely out of a touchscreen and 2 analog sticks, which was maybe 3D. It was anybody's guess what Nintendo was up to. E3 2016 came and went. Nintendo did not show off NX hardware, but they did confirm the next Zelda game in development, Breath of the Wild, would launch for Wii U and NX, similar to what they did dual releasing Twilight Princess on the GameCube and the Wii. Finally, on October 20th, we got that first reveal trailer and a March 2017 release date. The Switch was going to be a home console, mobile device hybrid after all, and it seemed like Nintendo was straddling the line between traditional and experimental for the control scheme. It's funny to think back on now, but at first Nintendo said the Switch was meant to coexist with the 3DS and not to replace it. Nintendo said the Switch was a home console that you happened to be able to take on the go. whereas the 3DS was a portable device suited as an entry-level product for younger players. The 3DS didn't end up getting a ton of support after the Switch launched, and looking back, it sounds like something of a hedge, but at the very start, Nintendo wanted to make it look like they were committed to maintaining two product lines. I was very hyped on the news, but sort of a little tampered my expectations after being so disappointed by the Wii U. As a lifelong Nintendo fan, I never expected Nintendo to release a console that I didn't care to pick up at launch, but they somehow managed to do that with the Wii U. The Switch seemed like something I'd want to get on release. I was very excited, but I didn't want to get too carried away before I was able to try it for myself. Nintendo marketed the Switch as having three distinct gameplay modes: TV mode in the dock, handheld mode, obviously in your hands, and tabletop mode using the kickstand. I will say it was a nice touch to add the kickstand just to have the option, but the original stand was somewhat flimsy, and even after the stand was redesigned for the Switch OLED, it was not a format I used much. Usually if I was in a group and I wanted to play Switch, it was easy enough to get in front of a display, but I won't argue with extra features. From the reveal videos, you could see that the Switch itself was a touchscreen tablet, and the original version actually had the same screen size as the Wii U tablet, and it was flanked by two controllers which were called Joycons. The Switch was also the first console to use cartridges since the N64, and as a physical game collecting person, I thought this was a great touch. We may not get instruction manuals in cases anymore, but there's something about cartridges that make them extra fun to collect, and now that it's not the 90s, we know not to throw out the boxes right away anymore. The cartridges also made for a fun bit of pre-launch news buzz. Jeff Gerstmann tweeted the Switch cartridges tasted absolutely foul, which led to a little challenge of people licking the cartridges to see how bad it really was. Apparently it's a genetic thing, where some people will hardly taste it, others will find it bad but whatever, and others will think it's the worst taste they've ever experienced ever, and it'll like trigger a gag reflex. But it forced Nintendo to issue a statement confirming, yes, they did this on purpose so kids wouldn't eat the cartridges by accident, and yes, it's a non-toxic bittering agent called denatodium benzoate. Try saying that 5 times fast. There's no such thing as bad press, I guess. Different from the Wii U, of course, is that Nintendo made no attempt to introduce any kind of dual screen setup. With the Switch, the game was either happening on the TV or on the tablet, but either way contained on a single screen. Nintendo at least had figured out by now that that experiment had failed, which certainly simplified matters and would make it easier for third-party devs to support the console. That said, it sort of confounded any attempts to bring DS games over and left the legacy of the DS line and its massive game library in question to this day, which is something I'll get to a little later. The Joy-Cons ended up having their share of hardware issues, but the underlying design was masterful and killed a lot of birds with one stone. You could leave them in the console for handheld mode, or you could slide them off the rails and use the controller split one in each hand. This let them function as a quasi-Wii Remote nunchuck replacement. You could also slot the Joy-Cons into a plastic shell that came in the box to turn it into a more traditional controller. Or you could hold one on its side and play most games that way, a little like what Nintendo was doing with the Wii Remote on its side. This was great because in a pinch, each single Joy-Con set was actually 2 controllers. They may not be quite as comfortable to use for 2 players as just using Pro controllers for very obvious reasons, but it's totally workable if that's all you have. For me, I most liked playing with one Joy-Con in each hand. It's what made the Joy-Cons feel the most unique to me relative to other controllers, and I loved being able to wave my arms around or just let them sort of hang wherever I wanted while still controlling the game, and not have to have my arms and hands sort of locked in that position that you're used to holding a controller in. The shell was nice as a pack-in, but I barely ever ended up using it. I think the Joy-Cons helped Nintendo strike that right balance of different enough from existing offerings to feel unique, but similar enough that they were able to support games in a normal way. You could go out and get a Switch Pro controller, and they're great too, but I never really felt forced to, which I think is a testament to Nintendo's design. After revealing the Switch in October, Nintendo discontinued the Wii U in North America that November, and in Japan the following January. I'm sure they were more than happy to. March was right around the corner, and lo and behold, demand was high. It felt like a Wii situation all over again. I couldn't find any Switches on launch at my local game stores, but my good buddy was able to find someone selling them on Craigslist at a markup. Zelda is my favorite series, and the new entry looked great, so we decided to go for it and meet the scalper's demands. When you're young, everything seems magical, and even the most random game you found at the bottom of the bargain bin can hold your attention. As you get older and more accustomed to what the gaming world has to offer, those wow moments become so rare. Nevertheless, you keep chasing after those moments, the ones that leave you spellbound, where you can barely comprehend how hard the envelope you're holding was just pushed. Breath of the Wild was very much one of those elusive wow moments for me. Breath of the Wild as a game deserves its own video, and obviously there's no shortage of analysis out there. It wasn't without its flaws, but I thought it gave the Zelda series a long overdue shot in the arm, and it hooked me in the best possible way. What really blew my mind hardest was the fact that all this was running on a handheld. Before the Switch, you sort of had this idea of what a game on a portable was, or what it could be. Portable games were mostly very limited compared to what you could be playing on console or PC, and always a generation or two behind. Game Boy games were sort of like NES games in your pocket. Game Boy Advance was like the SNES, and the Nintendo DS was closest to the N64. I remember when Ocarina of Time 3D came out for 3DS, and thinking it was very impressive Nintendo could get a game as big as Ocarina of Time running with substantially better graphics on a handheld, and that was somewhat recent memory in 2011. Then in 2014, you had Smash for 3DS. Pretty big deal that you could have a full-on Super Smash Bros. Game in your pocket. Handheld gaming was advancing, but nothing prepared me for having an entire, brand new, current-gen Zelda game that you could bring on the go, and by far the biggest Zelda game ever made at that. It blew my mind. It was an unbelievable leap that made me feel like I'd walked into the next generation overnight. Nintendo followed up Breath of the Wild with a solid year of first-party titles. ARMS and 1-2 Switch didn't really catch on, but Mario Kart 8 would be the single best-selling game on the Switch. Splatoon 2 moved over 10 million units. Mario Odyssey did well for itself and wound up as the number 5 best-selling game on Switch. And of course, Breath of the Wild would go on to become the best-selling Zelda game of all time. Nintendo did a great thing by making sure people had lots of things to play in that first year, but it was those first moments with Breath of the Wild that were most magical for me. Somehow, Nintendo had taken a Wii U game and turned it into the perfect introduction to the Switch's hardware. But there were issues brewing. Nintendo as a company has a decently strong record on hardware quality and durability. It seems like old Nintendo hardware was built to last. Many people still have their original launch N64s or Super Nintendos, and they work great. The clock in my launch era GameCube doesn't keep time anymore, but it sure did long past the point you'd reasonably expect it to. For Nintendo handhelds, there's the famous Game Boy that survived a grenade blast in the Gulf War, and back in 2005, a climber made news when he took a Nintendo DS all the way to the top of Mount Everest, and the thing still worked. Nintendo waited until its final DS design was able to work consistently after being dropped 10 times from the height of 1.5 meters, or about 5 feet, before putting the console into production. Satoru Iwata explained it this way: "If a kid puts a game console in the basket of their bicycle, then has to make a sudden stop, the console can come flying out, and it's not going to land on carpet. So I told them to make it so it could survive being dropped from 1.5 meters onto concrete. The hardware design team screamed, but proceeded to figure out how to pass the test. Like I said before, I definitely think it's a stroke of design genius that Nintendo was able to make the Joy-Cons 2 controllers in one, but they had usability issues from the start. At launch, users noted issues with the Joy-Con losing connection to the TV, which forced Nintendo to issue a statement a couple weeks after launch with recommendations for how to avoid the issue. A few weeks later, on March 22nd, Nintendo confirmed that the interference issues were caused by what they called a manufacturing variant in a small number of Joy-Cons from early production runs, and that the company would allow owners to send in their affected Joy-Cons for free repairs. Also, not for nothing, but to this day, sometimes Joy-Cons just don't seem quite clicked into the console, even after you slide them all the way down the tracks the proper way, but that's more of a minor complaint. Clicked in or not, the major issue was Joy-Con drift. Joy-Con drift is a term for when the analog sticks on the Joy-Con register movement even when the player is not touching them, which turns out happens when dust or other small particles come in contact with the stick's internal sensors. This became a pretty pervasive issue early in the Switch's life, and it's something Nintendo kind of gradually fixed, but never fully solved. Nintendo hardware is under warranty for a year, but you still have to sit there and wait for a long time for them to fix it and send it back to you. If it's not under warranty, the fee to fix it is $40, which seems really silly when you can buy one replacement Joy-Con for $50 or a brand new set for $80. It's one thing if you need to go out and get a new Wii remote because it went flying out of your hands. But the Joy-Con drift felt like you were paying for Nintendo's oversight. First, Nintendo acknowledged Joy-Con drift as an issue. Later, an internal memo surfaced which instructed customer service employees in North America to start offering repairs for free, regardless of warranty status. Finally, in June 2020, Nintendo President Shuntaro Furukawa issued a public apology, while Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser said they were working on improvements. Nintendo faced several class action lawsuits, which they actually eventually won, but the saga generated negative press and sort of soiled Nintendo's reputation for hardware resilience. I'd like to continue using my Joy-Cons, but who knows if these things are going to work in 5 or 10 years. With the release of the OLED revision of the Switch in October 2021, Nintendo said the new Joy-Con design should reduce the drift problem, but they did not expect that they could ever eliminate the drift, as it is an issue related to wear from long-term usage. Looking back, the Joy-Cons had something of a checkered past. Nintendo may have won the legal battles, but they sort of fumbled what could have otherwise been a very successful controller to go along with some of their greats from the past. Nintendo also launched the Switch with their online system in something of a limbo. Nintendo stated in pre-release announcements that the Switch would eventually require the purchase of a paid online service, but players could play online for free in the meantime until whenever that service launched. The Switch released with an online store called the eShop where you could download current releases and indie titles, but it didn't feature a classic games lineup like you saw on the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS's Virtual Console. It wasn't clear what Nintendo wanted to do, but at least people could play the Splatoon 2s and the Mario Kart 8s of the world online for the time being. The original plan was to roll something out by the fall of 2017, but by June, Nintendo pushed the release into the next year, with the Reginator quoted as saying, "As Nintendo looks at the overall online digital experience, there's a recognition that there's a lot of work to be world-class. We believe our IP is world-class. We believe that when we create a piece of hardware, it's world-class. We need to get our digital environment world-class, and that's what we're working hard to do." Okay, sounds like Reggie needed to buy some time. Meanwhile, Nintendo released a smartphone app for iOS and Android that July. The smartphone app let players use voice chat for supported multiplayer games, view your friends list to see who's online, and do a few game-specific things in a small handful of games, like check online rankings in Mario Kart 8. Nintendo is known for sort of being in the dark ages when it comes to their online functionality, and I think this phone app does a lot to explain the reputation. First, most obviously, it's very strange that you'd put voice chat for your online gaming service in a separate phone app rather than somehow doing it on console, whether that's through native functionality or through some kind of Discord integration. There's also zero text messaging or voice chat in general for if you're outside of a game. It's weird that they show you your whole friends list and it's like there as a reference. You can't really engage with it at all. Also, bizarrely, you can't browse the eShop or download games to your Switch the way you can with the Steam app, though you can do so on a web browser, and that just feels like Nintendo leaving money on the table. Amazingly, online play still relies on friend codes, which always seem clunky and outdated, especially after they got rid of the friend code system for the Wii U, only to bring them back for the Switch. Between the limited functionality and the fact that barely any games had anything really specific to do, the app felt like a total afterthought, and most people probably forgot it existed right away. Nintendo barely developed it out since releasing it in 2017, and it really makes you wonder what their vision for it could have possibly been. Finally, on September 18, 2018, Nintendo Switch Online officially launched, and with that, you had to start paying for online play, but Nintendo threw in some extras to sweeten the deal. For $20 a year, you got online play, you got cloud saves, and that's great to have as a backup if your system dies for some reason, and most importantly, full access to a library of 20 NES titles. This was a major change for Nintendo's classic games distribution, shifting from a pay-per-game download service, similar to like a Steam store, to a subscription model where you pay one price for access to a library, similar to something like Netflix. Nintendo's first venture into an online store was the Wii Virtual Console. It was available at launch, and it let you pay to download a selection of NES, SNES, and N64 games. Eventually, more games and systems were added, but the deal was you paid a price to download the game for permanent ownership on your Wii, and this is the system that they used for the Wii U and for the 3DS as well. Now, instead of buying games one by one, you had a library of 20 NES games, standard stuff like Zelda 1, Mario 1, Mario 3, Excitebike, with no option to purchase. You just get to keep playing as long as you keep subscribing. Nintendo added more NES games as time went by, SNES games a year later in 2019, an expanded tier with N64 and Genesis games in 2021, and Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance in 2023. Nintendo even made NES, SNES, N64, and Genesis controllers for Switch available. I did not feel the need to buy those, but they work with the classic game as well as for current games, and I hear okay things about them for anyone who wants to pick them up. It's nice to have choices in life, and I like that these things are available. The other really cool thing about Nintendo Switch Online, and I can't believe I'm saying this when usually online functionality is like this big dark mark against Nintendo, but a lot of these classic games can be played online. It usually supports friends only, but being able to play N64 games online in any capacity, with or without voice chat, is actually kind of huge, and was definitely an unexpected bonus for the service. I hope someday we can play Mario Party 2 online with strangers, but I'll take what I can get for now, and it's definitely more than I would have expected. Nintendo sort of drip-fed us these games, so for a while there was a lot of discussion on, oh, is the service truly worth the price? But little by little, Nintendo built up the library, and at this point, I think it unquestionably is. For $20 a year for standard, or $50 for expanded, you're getting access to a pretty massive classic game library, plus fun little throw-ins from time to time like Tetris 99 or F-Zero 99. From pure price of admission to quality games ratio, the value is for sure there. The value is there, but I have a question. Why are we still missing stuff that used to be available on the Virtual Console? For one, you could buy Nintendo DS games on the Wii U's Virtual Console. There's no DS games available on Switch Online, but besides that, as much as I've said Nintendo's built Switch Online's library up, which they have, there were simply more games available to buy back in the day on the Virtual Console, most notably the classic Pokemon games on 3DS. So the question is, where are they? Cynically, some say the missing games will stay missing because Nintendo is holding them back for a future remake or compilation, such as they did with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. Are these games simply too valuable to ever add to Nintendo Switch Online? Are the old games so fun that making them available would diminish people's interest in buying any future new release? I don't really think so, personally. For one, you can go back and play all the old Mario and Zelda games, and it's not like those series are hurting sales-wise. Yes, there probably are a few games Nintendo is holding back so they can turn around and charge us for a remake someday, but I'm thinking that's the exception rather than the rule. It just doesn't seem like Nintendo wants to spend their time remaking every last classic Pokemon game, and certainly wouldn't remake a lot of the more random stuff that you used to be able to buy on 3DS. I get that there's money to be made, but I'm just saying, if I were running a game studio, I'd be most excited about making something new, not recreating the past. Either way, the question certainly remains of what Nintendo wants to do with their back catalog. It's kind of an interesting question. Just think about it. What would you do if you were sitting on the rights to the classic Pokemon games? How would you balance short-term profits versus the long-term strength of your brand? How could you be mad at someone for pirating Pokemon Crystal when it costs $150 loose and over $650 in box on the secondhand market, and you won't make it available to purchase legitimately? Nintendo shut down the Wii's Virtual Console in 2019 and the Wii U and 3DS's in 2023. So you're out of luck unless you downloaded those games ahead of the closure. Even if you did buy Crystal for the 3DS was discontinued in 2020. So how long are you realistically going to be able to use what you bought? I think the move from the pay-per-game Virtual Console model to the current Netflix-style setup of Switch Online is an overall good thing. It's priced fairly for what you get, you don't have to losing access to stuff you bought in the past. It's hard to rationalize some of the inconsistencies, and I don't like thinking about potential lost media, but nothing's perfect, and it seems like Nintendo's slowly moving in the right direction on this one, despite certain missing titles and the persistence of friend codes. The Switch took off because it was able to attract so-called core gamers while catering to the casual audience that made the Wii so successful. During the wait for Switch Online, Nintendo surprised everybody by releasing the Nintendo Labo, which was a half-game, half-cardboard kit where you build little toys that turn into a small game. 2018 saw the release of the Variety Kit, the Robot Kit, and later the Vehicle Kit, and then in 2019 they released a VR kit which is compatible with Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Captain Toad, and Smash Ultimate. I love Nintendo for making stuff like this, even if it may not be for me. I went back and looked at some interviews with Labo's developers for what they said the inspiration was. He said, "I have always enjoyed thinking about interfaces, and I've always wanted to make things that you can interact with. We'd been thinking a lot about how to make something easy to grasp, something that could only be done with the Nintendo Switch console and its Joycon controllers. I just followed the logic of that question as far as I could, and it turned into Nintendo Labo. I started thinking about what makes Joy-Con controllers different from other game controllers. At first I thought it was the way the separated controllers could work together as one unit. But of course we'd already done that with the Wii Remote and the Nunchuck, so that couldn't be the standout feature. Then I thought about how unique it was that the Joy-Con controllers could be split, so two players could use one set. But then I remembered that the original Famicom had a similar setup, so even though I think it's a wonderful feature, it's more of a throwback than it is an innovation. So I kept thinking about the controllers and what made them special, and eventually I realized it was the sensors. Both the left and right controllers have sensors in them. If we made something with both Joy-Cons attached to it, we could use the differential between their sensors to do all kinds of new things. That was really the start of it. The three technologies that Nintendo Labo uses most are the dual gyro sensors, the IR motion camera, and the HD rumble function. I never picked up a Labo kit, just because I'm not really one for building things. I never was much into Lego as a kid. I guess I want my toys pre-built, but it's a reminder that Nintendo is a toy company first and foremost. It just so happens video games are the ultimate toy these days. I love when Nintendo releases something that's super charming, super imaginative, and something only they would have the creativity to come up with and the boldness to actually release. I also think the decision to use cardboard as opposed to plastic like I would have assumed added a ton of charm to the package and makes it seem more imaginative somehow. Other experiments from the Switch era included Ring Fit Adventure in 2019, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit in 2020, and Game Builder Garage in 2021. Mario Kart Live and Game Builder Garage were more modest successes, but Ring Fit Adventure did great, selling over 15 million units, good for the 11th best-selling game in the entire Switch library. Even Nintendo Switch Sports, which is a follow-up to Wii Sports, sold over 14 million units. I don't really hear anybody talking about Nintendo Switch Sports, but it definitely shows that the market for the Blue Ocean stuff never really went away. Ring Fit Adventure is an exer game where you hold this ring with the Joy-Cons in it and make a game out of fitness exercise. It's sort of up the alley of Wii Fit with the balance board, and apparently it really worked for people to help improve their cardio. It was also once worth over $200 when COVID made the market for these things a bit wonky. More on that later. Mario Kart Live Home Circuit lets you build a real-life racetrack that you can send an RC car down, which streams video from an onboard camera into the game. I never got this because, again, not really into building stuff in real life, but I'm definitely excited to see how else Nintendo might experiment with AR in the future, and I think there's a lot of potential for AR in the gaming market in general. Game Builder Studio lets you program your own games, sort of like a Mario Maker but expanded out, and people put pretty impressive stuff together with it. Game Builder came from the same dev team who worked on Labo, and was meant to help anybody learn the basics of logic and programming. Here's an excerpt from that dev diary. After developing the Nintendo Labo VR kit, which was the fourth installment in the series, I wondered if we could draw inspiration from the Toy-Con Garage VR portion of that game to create a separate product. In the case of the Nintendo Labo VR kit, after the player had a general understanding of creating Toy-Con, they could enjoy making their own VR games with the Toy-Con Garage VR. But I thought about making the applications more broad, not just for VR. I myself feel that the experience of doing the work and seeing something slowly come together is interesting. I had the thought to create something that would get people to experience that feeling right up until the end. In programming, there is a learning method commonly known as sutra copying. It's an effective method, so we referenced it. I think there are many people when they hear the word programming, they think, I don't know where to start, or I'm kinda not into it. So for those people, we've prepared interactive lessons that will enable them to complete making a game to the end. I hope that it will be useful as a place to experience programming for the first time. It wouldn't be Nintendo if we didn't get some out of left field products, but I think part of what made the Switch succeed is that it may have played host to some gimmick products, but it was not built around the gimmick. I like that Nintendo didn't bet the farm on Labo or try marketing Ring Fit Adventure as the next big thing, which is a stunt I feel like they would have pulled in the Wii or Wii U days. They finally learned their lesson. Meanwhile, the games kept coming. In addition to Labo and Nintendo Switch Online, 2018 gave us Smash Ultimate, while 2019 brought Mario Maker 2, Fire Emblem Three Houses, the Link's Awakening remake, Luigi's Mansion 3, and Pokemon Sword Shield, not to mention a hardware revision in the form of the handheld-only Switch Lite. Rumors were abound that Nintendo could be working on a Switch Pro or Switch HD when the unthinkable happened.
Today, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. There are now more than 125,000 confirmed cases worldwide, including...
The world shut down in 2020, and as if on cue, Nintendo released Animal Crossing New Horizons on March 20, 2020. It was certainly a case of right place at the right time. New Horizons is the second best-selling Switch game behind Mario Kart 8 with a staggering 46 million units sold. It dethroned Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue as the best-selling game in the history of Japan, and it outsold the entire rest of the Animal Crossing series combined by a pretty wide margin. Releasing for the Switch generally tends to be pretty good for a series. Super Smash Bros., Mario Kart, Mario Party, Luigi's Mansion, Metroid, Pikmin, and Fire Emblem all have their single best-selling title on the Switch. Mario Odyssey is also the best-selling 3D Mario game, though there are 2D Marios that have outsold it. Part of this for sure has to do with the Switch's massive install base, but I would also say Nintendo mostly delivered quality across these titles. Nintendo also did a great job porting Wii U games to the Switch and working with third-party devs. The games were flying off the shelves, but it seemed like Nintendo was a bit overdue for a hardware revision. The Switch was great for indie titles and as a way to revisit old games via its library of compilations, but already 3-4 years into its life, it wasn't really keeping up with current-gen PS4 and Xbox One releases. The market loved the Switch's form factor, and the Steam Deck wouldn't release until early 2022, so there really was a window that a Switch Pro that could better keep up with current-gen titles on the go would have been the best of both worlds. The Switch Pro obviously never materialized, and it was tough to tell how much COVID had to do with it, how close they really were, or what other factors may have been at play. Your guess is as good as mine. Nintendo acknowledged COVID disrupted certain non-specific release schedules. Some say a chip shortage caused them to scrap the Switch Pro. Others say they were working on a new Switch, but since COVID made software sales go up so much, all of a sudden there really wasn't much of a need to release a new one. Either way, I would definitely say 2021 was a bit of a down year games-wise, Metroid Dread aside, and that could be because COVID made it a lot harder to develop in 2020 and pushed everything back. It's hard to know what led to what, but either way, Switch sales never seemed to drop off enough that Nintendo felt the need to shake up the market with a huge hardware revision. Finally, in July 2021, Nintendo announced the Switch OLED for release in September. The Switch OLED had a slightly bigger and significantly nicer screen, but it was not the new chipset or updated graphics many were hoping for. That was pretty much that. Nintendo made news for the wrong reason again in 2020, and this time in a very unforced error that should have been a huge win for them. As part of Mario's 35th anniversary, Nintendo revealed Super Mario 3D All-Stars in a September Nintendo Direct. This was a bundle containing Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy 1, though oddly not Galaxy 2, all on one Switch cartridge. The game was to release on September 18, 2020, and the catch was it would be discontinued both physically and digitally 6 months later on March 31, 2021. The internet was definitely not happy with this decision, but there are a few things to point out. On the one hand, even without Galaxy 2, The bundle was an unequivocally good deal. 3 classics you could take on the go for the price of 1, and yeah, with a 6-month window, it's not like Nintendo wasn't giving anybody who wanted the game plenty of time to hunt down a copy. But the fact that they were even delisting it from the eShop seemed unnecessary and left a bitter taste in people's mouths. To make matters worse, the package on release seemed like something of a lazy port. There wasn't much in the way of extras besides soundtracks for the games, and Mario Sunshine didn't even natively support the GameCube controller until Nintendo released a patch a couple months later in November. Luckily, this timed release window model was not used for future titles, but it set something of a bad precedent and seemed to many like an artificial scarcity move by Nintendo just to boost sales of something that would have probably sold fine anyhow. Issues aside, $60 is a fair price to pay for 3 out-and-out all-time classics now available on the go. It just seemed like Nintendo was being anti-consumer about it. Maybe someday they'll want to resell us Mario Galaxy 2. In an age where consolidation became the norm, Nintendo wasn't one to buy a bunch of studios. Nintendo's always had a bunch of companies they work very closely with, think like Game Freak or HAL Labs, but actually acquiring studios was never really their thing. During the second half of the Switch era, Nintendo used its newfound cash infusion to make a few select purchases. They started off buying Canada-based Next Level Games on January 4th, 2021. Next Level began its life with the Mario Strikers series, as well as the Punch-Out! Reboot for Wii, before moving on to developing Luigi's Mansion 2 for 3DS and 3 for the Switch. I never played the original Mario Strikers, but I thought Strikers Charged on Wii was excellent. Luigi's Mansion is nothing mind-blowing, but they're very well made. They definitely have that Nintendo charm, which is probably what Nintendo recognized when they moved to buy the studio. A year later, in February 2022, Nintendo announced they were acquiring SRD. Unlike Next Level Games, which was a relatively recently founded studio and which developed its own titles that Nintendo farmed out, SRD had been working with Nintendo since the very beginning in the early 80s, and came on as surge resources to assist on projects Nintendo was otherwise working on internally. It's not exactly clear just how many games SRD has worked on with Nintendo over the years, but just a list of known projects is very lengthy. Lastly, in 2024, Nintendo announced they were acquiring Miami, Florida-based Shiver Entertainment, which had worked on the Switch ports of Mortal Kombat and Hogwarts Legacy. The announcement said Shiver's focus would remain porting software to multiple platforms, including the Switch, which hopefully signals a continued focus on third-party support. During the Switch era, Nintendo signaled they wouldn't be buying quite as many studios as Sony or especially Microsoft, but they were open to expanding with a strategic acquisition in the right circumstances. Hopefully this translates to more games and other projects while not creating too much corporate bloat or losing the Nintendo spirit. It seems like from what Nintendo buys, they have to be really close with the company for it to make sense and ease the transition. And hopefully it prevents another rare situation from happening where a great second-party developer is eaten up by a rival publisher. Ever since releasing the Switch OLED, Nintendo's kept their foot on the gas pedal with a mix of original titles, remakes, and ports. At this point, you can get almost every Wii U game you might have missed on the Switch, and Nintendo also remade a handful of games in their back catalog, though with sort of an up and down value proposition. A ground-up Metroid Prime remaster for $40? Let's go. Paper Mario Thousand Year Door and Super Mario RPG remasters for $60? I'm all for it. Luigi's Mansion 2, Donkey Kong Country Returns for full price, and Mario vs. Donkey Kong Remaster for $50? I'm not so sure. This is also the time frame that Nintendo started expanding into other areas in earnest. Super Nintendo World opened in Universal Studios Japan in 2021 and in California in 2023. Also in 2023, the Chris Pratt Mario movie released and became the first film based on a video game to gross over $1 billion and is the 17th highest grossing film of all time. I was a big fan of the Mario movie. I thought Jack Black stole the show. Some thought it could have used a little bit more plot-wise, but I was fine with the light plot because it's not like you play Mario games for their in-depth story or anything. My only real complaint was I thought they leaned a little too heavily on licensed music. There were great references to some of the classic Mario tracks, but I don't know why you need the Beastie Boys or AC/DC thrown in. It just sort of broke immersion for me. I am very glad we got some DK rap and was not expecting that at all. Nintendo is planning to release a second Mario movie in 2026 and confirmed a live-action Zelda is in production. I'm extremely pumped for both. Which brings us to the last year of the Switch's life. I came in assuming this would be a super down year, and I would not have faulted them at all for it, but we got Princess Peach Showtime, a brand new 2D Zelda, a proper original Mario Party in Jamboree, a Mario and Luigi reboot game with Brothership, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door Remaster, Luigi's Mansion 2 Enhanced Port, a new Famicom detective game for the visual novel enthusiasts, and the speedrunning themed NES World Championship. I thought the quality of some of these games were a little suspect or iffy, kind of an up and down year in that way, but all in all the release volume was a lot higher than it really needed to be, given they were packing it in while they wound the Switch down. Nothing mind-blowing, but they definitely kept their foot on the gas pedal. 2024 also saw the release of the Nintendo Music app, which is great, and the Alarmo clock. I don't need a $100 alarm clock in my life personally, but I always appreciate Nintendo going out on a limb, and it's cool seeing them release more lifestyle products. It's like an extension of Labo or something. Just a guess, but I'm confident Nintendo can diversify and branch out into other areas while not losing sight of the core mission of keeping the first-party games coming. I hope to be surprised by more product announcements in the future. That's just about it. Nintendo's future seems very bright, but then again, it also seemed bright after the Wii, and look what happened. Nothing lasts forever, and especially in an industry as fast-moving as games and entertainment, nobody is ever safe. Between a record-setting Switch generation and expansions into movies, theme parks, and music and alarm clocks, Nintendo is diversifying and trying to parlay their brand into a media empire rather than exist as what they've always been, a toy company, and I can't wait to see what happens next. What were your highs and lows during the Switch era? Did you think Nintendo could come back from the disaster of the Wii U, or did you think they had lost their way for good? The Switch era brought so many great memories for me, and I hope they keep the streak alive. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon.